Alright, so this is going to be the last big push, and I'm already doing what I didn't want to do, which is show you guys a bunch of abstract stuff and then have it not be relevant to anything in particular. But there's so much useful information I need to go over before we start applying it, and I want to make sure I hit enough of it, or all of it if I can, before you start jumping in there. So we're going to talk about polygroups, and we're going to talk about the last modifier brush. By modifier brush, I mean when it's a modifier of your brush. If I hold down Control-Shift or Control or Shift, those are kind of modifiers. Control-Shift is two types of modifier. So just like when I hit Control and it changes this icon, I can go in here and check out all my masking stuff. If I hold down Control-Shift, I can go in here and check out all my clipping, slicing, trimming, and visibility rectangle stuff. Selection items. So this will be the last big push of modifiers, and we're also going to talk a little bit about polygroups. So by default, if we hold down Control-Shift, it's SelectRect. What is SelectRect? Well, if you hold down Control-Shift and drag, it's going to drag out a rectangle. So just like when we were masking and there was a mask rect, this is SelectRect. And also, just like masking, if you hold down Control-Shift, you can basically do all of these things right here, just changing your stroke and sometimes your alpha, but basically just changing stroke options. But we'll keep it simple, and we'll do SelectRect, and we'll just go through, just like we did with masking. I'm going to go through each one of these. So I'll hold down Control-Shift, and by default it's SelectRect, so we're going to start with the selection modifiers first. So holding down Control-Shift, and I'm sorry I keep saying that, click and drag, and it's going to be green. It's going to be a green box, and just like masking, you can hit spacebar and move this thing around, so you can kind of position it. And also, just like masking, it's going to go all the way through your object. So just a couple things to keep in mind. So let's say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to hit comma, and I'm going to go back through here to my quick saves, and I'm going to pick an interesting quick save because I don't want to look at this odd square with a thing hanging off it. Let's use this thing. So if I hold down Control-Shift and I want to isolate the ears visually, I can hold down Control-Shift, drag a rectangle, and with it green, I can use spacebar, but if it's green and it's over the ear, I can let go, and it'll isolate visually all of the ears right here. If I go to the side and I hold down Control-Shift, I can drag out and I can hold down Alt, and that'll make it red, and you can still hold down spacebar and you can then position it, and you can hold down Alt. When I hold down Alt and it turns red, that'll get rid of it visually. Gets to be kind of a pain when you need to get rid of these things. So what I'm going to do is hold down Control-Shift, and instead of SelectRect, I'm going to do the one right next to it, which is Select Lasso. So with that selected, hold down Control-Shift, start dragging, and I can hold down Alt, and then I can just trace right along here and get rid of that. Hold down Control-Shift, tap Alt, and you can tap Alt all day long if you want to. But when you're ready to let go, make sure you have Alt selected if you want to get rid of that stuff visually. And you can go up here, hold Control-Shift, so you can very precisely get rid of pieces of your object. So now we just have the ears isolated. Now, let's say we want to isolate these ears again later on while we're sculpting, and we don't want to have to do that selection process all over again. Really easy way to give you a selection is to go ahead and make this into a polygroup. So let's go all the way down. I'm going to close the deformation menu for now, and we'll leave the geometry menu open. And we'll open up polygroups. So in here there's a bunch of options, and I'm going to, just like with masking, there's going to be some hotkeys I can show you. One of them is auto groups, which we'll get to. The one I want is group visible. So if I roll over this one, that's Alt-G. So if I turn on polyframe, the only way you're going to see visually your polygroups is if you turn on polyframe. And right now they're purple. So if I do this group visible, which is Alt-G, I'm going to do Alt-G, and that's going to group whatever's visible on the screen into its own polygroup. So now when I hold down Control-Shift and tap in my document, that's going to bring everything back, and you're going to notice I've got light purple ears and a light purple skull. So with Control-Shift again, if I tap my ear, it'll just isolate that one polygroup, or if I tap my face, it won't isolate that, and here's why. And this is a feature. If you hold down Control-Shift and it's on Select Lasso, what you can do is actually, if you Control-Shift any of these edges, it will actually isolate a poly strip or a poly ring, and that comes in handy. If you don't want that, go ahead and change it from Select Lasso to SelectRect, and SelectRect doesn't have that associated with it, so it doesn't have any fancy poly ring selection. You can just tap an ear, tap a face, and you'll have that problem. So if you hold down Control-Shift and tap a polygroup, it'll isolate that polygroup. Now you're going to see there's this non-vert welded little piece inside of here. If you want to, let's say you wanted to add this little non-vert welded piece in here to this polygroup here. what I would do, there's a couple different ways to do this. I guess the simple, most straightforward way is to isolate this, go to the side, hold down Control Shift, and you're going to hold down Alt, and that's going to subtract that piece. And if you want to subtract more, you can hold down Control Alt and subtract that piece, or you can go into Select Lasso, hold down Control Alt and subtract that piece. So what it's basically doing is subtracting from what's visible, but then if you go to hold down Control Shift and drag in your document, that will invert visibility, and you'll see that all that stuff you're subtracting is actually adding it to all this stuff here. Now again, if we do Group Visible, whatever's on my screen, Alt-G, and I don't actually use Alt-G a lot. I'll show you another hotkey in just a second that does the same thing. You can group all that together, hold down Control Shift and tap to bring everything back, and now you've grabbed that, all that little extra bits that you grabbed, plus that little hole in there, that's all been added to the selection. So just to recap, I'm going to do Alt-G with everything showing. Now it's all one polygroup, right? I'm going to hold down Control Shift, select Lasso. I'm going to select Lasso the ear, and if I want to, if it's green, it's going to select everything and show it. If I Control Shift drag, it's going to invert that, and then go to the side here and Control Shift and hold down Alt and add that to the other selection. Control Shift drag to invert that, and then Control Alt, and then Control Shift and then Alt and get rid of that. So you can kind of just do a really quick cleanup, do Alt-G to group visible, and there you go. Kind of seems like a lot, but once you get in there and kind of start playing with it, just like everything else in this upfront tutorial ZBrush stuff, once you're in there and comfortable, it'll be second nature. And polygroups are actually surprisingly super duper useful. I don't use them a tremendous amount on organic sculpting or just kind of concepting. Sometimes I do if I'm going to break something off, but it becomes actually really handy when you start doing the box modeling stuff. But let's make another selection here. I'm going to hold down Control Shift with Lasso, and I'm going to isolate this little front piece here. Let's lay down through here. There we go. So I'm going to isolate that. Now I don't want this back piece. I just wanted to isolate this front piece. So I'm going to go to the side here, Control and drag around it, hold down Alt, get rid of that selection, and I want this to be its own polygroup, so I'm going to hit Alt-G, and there you go. So now we've got a front polygroup, which you can Control Shift, and again, because of that Control Shift select Lasso, if you don't tap on an actual vert, if you actually end up tapping on an edge, it'll select that edge ring. We don't want that functionality. Just go back to Select Rectangle if you want, and now you can just tap between these separate polygroups. And again, just to go through the visibility, and visibility is what we need to talk about as well. So here's polygroups, and here's visibility. So in the visibility menu, you have hide point, which is hide unmasked, and then you have show point, which is show. So if this is, and here's the other thing too, we can isolate a polygroup. We can Control Tap to group or to mask everything that's visible. Control Shift to bring everything back. You can Control Tap to isolate, invert that. You can still blur it. You can blur your mask. You can sharpen your mask. If you want to, you can do hide point, which will hide, that's hiding everything that's unmasked. You can do hide point. And then if we Control Shift invert that, and then we Control Shift get rid of that face, we can now group visible. So Alt-G. And now we have like a little ring around there. So a lot of different ways. And when we get into groups, loops, and stuff like that, that'll be even cooler. There's so much things we need to get through. But again, just trying to keep it basic. Let's go ahead and hit Control or Alt-G. And this is all one polygroup again. So we've talked a little bit about polygroup. Visibility is another good one. So let's go ahead and Control Shift, grab your Select Lasso, and we'll go ahead and grab his little Punisher face here. And we'll go ahead and get rid of this. Alt. There we go. And now with visibility, what you can do is you can grow. So if you grow visibility, which is Control Shift X, that'll kind of grow your selection. Shrink will shrink from the edges, shrink your selection. So you can kind of grow and shrink. And this comes in handy too when you start doing box modeling stuff. And when we hit box modeling, I'll go back through visibility and polygroups as it pertains to that type of modeling. And then you can do Alt-G and group that.